INTP versus INFP. Now, this is a surprisingly common mistype. Let's have a look at why and how you could tell the difference. So they're both IP types. They're both introverts. They have the same two middle functions, and they lead with introverted judging functions. So the overall vibe is going to be strikingly similar. Which framework do you use? The way I think about both INTPs and INFPs is as framework builders. In the case of INTPs, it's a logical framework. And for INFPs, it's a value-based framework. One is based on making sense in a detached and impersonal way, and the other is about making sense of how you feel and your preferences, which by definition is a very deeply personal thing. INTPs navigate their way through life by taking in information, then prodding and poking it with reason and rationality, analysing it from many different angles and perspectives, with the eventual aim of turning it into known knowledge. It becomes like a logical spider web of interconnected paths, with each thread leading to a conclusion in a very linear way. INFPs do exactly the same thing, but with a slight difference. They take in information, react to it emotionally, and see which feelings it inspires. They look at it from different angles and perspectives, with the eventual aim of making a settled value judgment on it. Then, once they've both added to their respective systems, that will help them navigate situations in future by referring back to it. It's something that they both build, then use as a guide. Introverted thinking versus introverted feeling. So let's compare the top function of each type. TI is precise and also seeks precision. For example, with the definition of things. And it's dispassionate. Whereas introverted feeling, on the other hand, is more amorphous. It doesn't have a clear structure because it's dealing with feelings which are, by definition, kind of fluid and difficult to pin down. So if you were to try to get an INTP and an INFP to explain what's going on in their heads, there's a good chance that you'll have 10 tangents from both of them after a few minutes. But if you can get them to write their thoughts down, I've noticed that an INTP's writing style will be, in a sense, easier to follow because they write in a very step-by-step and linear way, leading to some logical conclusion. Whereas an INFP's writing style, on the other hand, will tend to be more, in a sense, poetic, by which I mean concerned with creating a vibe or a mood, or painting a broad general picture, which can often be open to interpretation by the reader. Introverted thinking, precision and clarity. Introverted feeling, amorphous and complex. One thing that I should say is that although high introverted feeling users may struggle to explain their feelings in a precise way, they do feel them in precise ways and have a very deep understanding of the subtleties of them. I think the difficulty comes from the fact that emotions are actually very difficult to convey or translate through words, which is often why INFPs express themselves with art, with music. Or if it is writing, it's usually a very creative writing style. Okay, let me give you a comparison between a TI detached logical mindset and an FI value-based mindset. I've been watching a lot of Marvel films recently, so spoilers ahead. And there's a point where our overly attractive heroes have to make what is a famous philosophical choice. Do we kill this one character to potentially save many more? Interestingly, the character in question even says the most logical move is to kill me, but one of the characters outlines a principle he has, which is that we don't trade lives. So on one side you have the logical, you could class it as utilitarian philosophy. What is the most logical option to do the most good? The ends justify the means. The means in this case are terrible, but the consequences of not doing it would be worse. Then there's the other side of things, the FI side, which says regardless of how objectively bad this event is, or how objectively measurably good that TI solution is, the main thing here is to make sure that we don't sacrifice our values, our principles, what we stand for. Now, as always, that's an extreme dichotomy, and you can make a case for either approach, but it is a nice archetypical distinction between TI and FI. Many INTPs would no doubt go with the archetypical FI approach and vice versa. But in general, I'd say the TI users would lean to the cold, detached and utilitarian approach, which you could argue is actually the morally superior approach, and that FI users would stand on principle. And they would make the case that there is something more important than just the numbers game. To change who we are and what we stand for may in fact represent a greater loss or defeat than the loss of our lives. Inferior extroverted feeling versus inferior extroverted thinking. Okay, so let me step back here, metaphorically speaking. The inferior function often feels like a threatening thing for a type. It is so different from their natural approach to life, so in contrast with their strengths, so at odds with what they think life ought to be like, that it's hard to feel like it's anything other than an attack. For an INFP, the idea that there will be times in your life where you are not judged by the individuality that you bring to the table, you will instead be judged by these very cold, detached, objective, external metrics, that you will be placed on a spectrum of competence. You did this job well or badly. You did it fast or slow. You were efficient or inefficient. You got a good grade or a low grade. The thought that not only does that approach to life exist, but you are going to have to be forced to confront and accept it at some point is a very frightening and disturbing idea. For an ENTP or an ENFP, the idea that these small SI details not only matter, but if neglected, can actually disrupt and ruin your grand vision or plan. For an ESTP or an ESFP, the thought that to truly harness their power, their force, their adaptability, that at some point, to make it worthwhile, they will have to focus on some kind of narrow path. And for ISTPs and INTPs, the thought that playing the game of appearances, pandering to sometimes, or maybe often, irrational social conventions, playing the game of charm and managing interpersonal relationships is not only capable of competing with a logical approach to life, but many times can win against it. That terrible realization that adopting an ultra-logical approach to life is not necessarily a rational approach to life. This conflict and imbalance between your top function and your bottom function will more often than not represent the reoccurring problems that you have in life. So let me expand on that for INFPs and INTPs. Like I mentioned, INFPs have extroverted thinking as their inferior function. TE, to a certain extent, involves conformity to external metrics. It's about standardization, order, systemization. It's the complete opposite of the way INFPs want to approach the world. To them, it's akin to stripping away individuality, and there's almost nothing worse than that. INFPs desperately strive to maintain their uniqueness and not simply exist on the spectrum of other people's judgment. In the mind of an INFP, if you get straight A's at school, that simply puts you at the top of the box. Meanwhile, INFPs are busy trying to tunnel themselves out of the box. The danger of repressing extroverted thinking is that you can kind of fall into your own wonderland. I can tell that all the INFPs are thinking, why is that a bad thing? External standards and judgments do exist for a reason. They're not always going to be representative of some kind of oppressive system or societal structure. So INFPs can be at risk of divorcing themselves so far from these conventions that they can become isolated in their thinking and kind of fall into echo chambers of confirming their own feelings and views on things. INTPs have extroverted feeling as their inferior function. Extroverted feeling is about being attuned and attentive to not just other people's feelings, but their perspectives, their point of view, their preferences and biases. And in its desire to maintain harmony and remove friction, it can come across as being a very slippery function. INTPs can often perceive it as being shallow. Now, I've actually described INTPs as being capable of being chameleons. On some level, or at some point, every INTP has to contend with this style versus substance dilemma. And they'll conclude, okay, I'll use the style as a gateway to my substance. I'll be accommodating and charming. Then, when the time comes, I'll hit them with my TI genius. Despite the fact that I've advocated this strategy and tried to employ it whenever possible, it's always good to bear in mind that lots of people, maybe even most people, probably don't want to be hit over the head with your TI genius. So I think that INTPs really resent the fact that they have to play this social game if they want to be seen as normal humans. Yet, even when they do it, people might not be receptive to their insights. This idea that an extroverted feeling approach to life can work in and of itself is very upsetting and unpleasant to INTPs. Okay, so what questions could you ask yourself based on that information? If you have ever started arguments or dragged arguments out with people over very pedantic logical points, and I'm saying when you really can't let it go, even when you know it's going to cause interpersonal issues, then you're more likely to be an INTP. If you tend to dichotomize or conceptualize things in terms of logical and illogical, correct and incorrect, true and false, clever and stupid, again, that would point to INTP. If one of the things that bothers you most is observing a person get by purely on style, on charm, while you know full well that that person doesn't have good logical reasons for their plans or what they espouse, that could point to a big imbalance between TI and FE, which in this case would be INTP. If you dislike cold, detached, systematic approaches to life, that could be a sign that you don't greatly value either introverted or extroverted thinking, which could mean you're an INFP. If you feel like it is extremely difficult to express the full extent and complexity of your thoughts and feelings, and that sometimes expression through a different medium like art or music or storytelling is much more natural than simply explaining, that could point to you being an INFP. If you've watched this far and you still don't know what your type is, then please like, subscribe and comment to give me the incentive to do this in more depth. Also, feel free to check out our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/lovewho, and also check out the link to our typology themed mugs, and we're starting to make some t-shirts and hoodies as well. I think I deserve a cup of tea.